Charlie, are you in a truck backing up?
No, but there's one 4 stories down.
Sounds like you might not be on the right microphone. You might want to check your settings.
That's very strange. What the...
Missed you guys.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Welcome to Science Sort of. You're listening to episode 307. Our theme this week is laughing all the way to the lab, because you know how when you laugh all the way to the bank, but when you're a scientist, you go to the lab instead? That's where that theme comes from. That's what we were going for with that joke. And joining me to laugh at those jokes, even if they're not very good, to talk about things that are science, to talk about things that are sort of science, and talk about things that wish they were science, it's Patrick.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. And Charlie is also here. Charlie is here too. Hello, Charlie.
I always appreciate jokes that come with explanations.
Well, the explanation for why we are laughing this episode is because I interviewed comedian Shane Mauss. Shane Mauss was in town for a show we're going to talk about in some detail. But to tell you guys, he has a show called Stand Up Science where he has scientists come down to the comedy club, and he and another comedian do some stand-up, and then the scientists explain their work, and then they do a panel discussion at the end. And just kind of a cool thing for science outreach and for getting scientists in front of an audience that probably wouldn't see their work otherwise. So
yeah, that's awesome. We kind of do it the other way around, where we have comedians on and then we explain jokes.
Yeah. Between you, me, and the wall, and everyone listening, it was a little intimidating to interview a comedian, considering how many terrible jokes I tell on this show that I hope get laughs. So it's like, can I make a comedian laugh in the moment? And I guess you'll just have to listen in to find out. But just to introduce him properly, since I kind of just jumped right into the conversation for the interview, he is touring right now with the Stand Up Science show all across the US. In addition to that, he also has a couple of comedy albums and specials available. The one on Netflix right now, which is maybe the best platform for most people, is called Mating Season. We talk about it a little bit in the interview. He also has a documentary out now called Pyschonautics, a comics exploration of psychedelics. And you can go learn more about that at the link that will be in the show notes on our website, ScienceSortOf.com. And he also has been on Conan, Jimmy Kimmel Live, Comedy Central, Showtime, BBC, and more. He has a podcast himself called Here We Are, and I was a guest on that, and I will tell you more about that when we get towards the end of our show here. So, here's the first part of my interview with Shane Mauss, and then when I cut that, we're gonna go straight into drinks. So everybody just hang on and enjoy. Something I wanted to ask you, and this is something I do when I'm interviewing scientists, is there's lots of different kinds of scientists, and I always ask them, like, what kind of scientist do you identify as? Because there's usually a lot of specificity in that. And I don't know if there's a similar taxonomy for comedy, but like, is there a type of comedian you identify as for people who may not be familiar with your work?
Well, it's changed over the years. So if people were to like just, Google search videos, and they'd probably find like old late night stuff would pop up. And that was from when I started as kind of a short joke, absurdist kind of comedian. When you start out, you only get like 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the style that works very well in that. And then
I heard you describe your early style as very mathematical.
Well, that was like in terms of kind of the joke structures and the timing. I think I thought about it in terms of almost like math equation. It had a similar kind of feel to math for me, and I always really liked math. And just knowing like how long to hold and pause, and like the amount of tension that would elicit in a room, and when the right time to relieve that tension, there was a lot of kind of dynamics going on within that I think I had a very natural grasp for early on. But now I don't even know how to write those jokes really anymore, because I'm kind of so detached from that. When I started doing longer sets, I always kind of tried to push myself into doing things that I was uncomfortable doing. And so at first it was like maybe doing some characters here and there or telling a story. All of that was like me getting out of my comfort zone. Now I'll even like, I have 2 jokes now where I have to sing on stage, and part of that's just because that is the most uncomfortable. I hate singing. I don't feel comfortable doing it, and so that's my way of just like getting myself out of my comfort zone. So I've always just kind of, those are examples of how I've just tried to push myself to get out of my comfort zone. And one of them originally early on was I wanted to do longer form things, and I wanted to have things that connected a little bit more because that was so different than what I was doing early on. And so I wanted to learn how to do like a themed show. And I thought that I would do a themed show about something science related, and I didn't really know what. I wasn't even, looking back, I wasn't even that into science.
Yeah, I was going to ask, that was my next question, was kind of where did the fascination with science come from?
I mean, I was raised Catholic, and that backfired horrifically for my parents because it didn't take for me very well at all. And
yeah, I've heard you talk about that in interviews a little bit, and it sounds like in some ways we have similar journeys, which I've talked about on the show before, but it sounds like you sort of drifted away from a belief structure much earlier in your life than I did.
Yeah, I was like 8 or 9 years old. I remember specifically the summer between 4th and 5th grade is when I decided that God was this made-up thing, or certainly religion was this made-up thing. And then it made me feel like a crazy person because, as far as I knew, everyone believed in this thing, and even if they had slightly different takes on it.
Yeah, it's the same where I grew up. It was like, I knew plenty of people who were different religions, but I didn't know anybody who didn't have any religion. And I've thought about that with the way you talk about some of the psychedelic stuff that you're into, is that like, if you don't have the words for it, it's really hard to like actually even conceptualize what it is that you're feeling and thinking. And so it sounds like you might have been struggling with that a little bit.
I didn't know the term atheist or agnostic. And so I was just like, well, either everyone in the world is crazy or I'm crazy. I guess I'm probably crazy then. That would be the most logical thing. But then I started kind of questioning other people when I reached, my teens, and started kind of nervously broaching the subject with close friends, and I met a lot of resistance from everyone that I talked to right away.
Really?
It was just I thought maybe there'd be a couple people that were like also on the same page that I was, and no one that I talked to was. Everyone just was on board with whatever their belief system
and this
they
is
were
where you were
taught.
growing up?
Yeah,
Okay.
and outside of a little city called La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Gotcha.
And so it became frustrating for me. And so I think I got a little bit into evolution and physics early on. I would just learn enough so that I could argue with people.
Okay.
And so that kind of got me into reading. I would just pick up a science magazine here and there. I wasn't much of a reader, but when I did read, I was reading science. And so early on, when I was like, I'm going to start doing themed shows, I also had a lot of jokes about time travel in my act at the time, and I don't know why, but I was like, maybe I'll do a show about time travel. Then I started looking into time travel.
I mean, that's the tricky thing about time travel, because what might have influenced you to do time travel hasn't happened yet. And so you might still be waiting for whatever it is that's going to come back and give you the idea in the first place.
Unless something's already been going back through time to nudge me along through this path.
Oh, there you go.
Without me knowing it. And so these are the things that I liked thinking about. And so I tried to write an act about time travel, and then I tried to write an act about physics more broadly, and then I just gave up on that for a while.
Is physics funny? Like, is there humor there?
There was a lot of like physics dick jokes
Okay.
that I was making of like, relativity. If I'm on a train
Gotcha,
traveling at
okay,
this speed, and like to my girlfriend, it might seem like I didn't last very long, but to someone observing on a platform, they might be very impressed. And
pretty good.
And so But it was ultimately unsatisfying. I'm like, I'm still just making stupid dick jokes, and it couldn't seem to escape from that.
So then you eventually transition to evolutionary biology, where it's still dick jokes, but they're biologically relevant.
Yeah, biologically relevant dick jokes are what really kind of resonated with me.
One of the other people who co-hosts the podcast with me, Kelly Weinersmith, her husband is a cartoonist and a webcomic guy. So she has some, a lot of comedy in her life, but we often joke about how whenever you get two people who've studied biology talking, it is a countdown to when somebody brings up either sex or poop. Like one of those two things or both are definitely...
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Poop's a big topic.
It seems like it comes up, or at least like excreta or waste, or I mean, it's some of the work that I do, it involves, dealing with sloth poop, both because we have modern sloth poop is relatively easy to get a hold of. They keep it in their body for like a week at a time. So, there's always some there. And then we actually have fossil sloth poop in the...
Sloths only poop once a week?
About that. Yeah, they have about a
that's nice.
The studies have shown at least three-toed sloths have about a 300-hour retention time in the stomach, which is about 12 and a half days, which is absurdly long.
That is great.
It's about twice as long as like a manatee, which is the next slowest digesting mammal. And like even horses and elephants and humans are all about a day, but the sloths just really take their time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they even slow.
Yep.
They just do
every single thing slow.
Very slow.
Yeah.
Do they breathe slow as well?
Kind of.
Really?
They have a bunch of weird, like, internal, almost like hammock or harnessing structures to like hold their organs all in the right place because they're upside down all the time. So I wonder if like breathing is a little bit of a struggle because the musculature for a sloth is different than a right side up mammal. But
I love it. I like sloths because when you just see a sloth, intuitively it's just like how did it make it?
Could evolution take every wrong turn but then still keep that animal alive just enough to...
How has it not been weeded out? It's so insane.
It hasn't been weeded out. My thinking, well, most of them have, so we're at like a very low point in sloth diversity. So there used to be 80 to 100 different genera of sloths from Alaska to the tip of South America, all throughout the Caribbean. So we've lost most of our sloths. We're down to, 2 genera from 100 to 80, depending on which paleo estimate you believe. So sloths aren't doing great right now, but they've also found a lifestyle that nobody else wants. Like no other mammal wants to eat leaves all day and hang out in a tree. Like it's just not a good lifestyle because it's very energetically taxing while being very caloric light. Like the calories and the nutrients of tree leaves aren't great for a mammal.
So you just move real slow and eat a lot.
An ounce of metabolic energy to waste, basically.
So, and that's why they poop so slow. They're trying to get every little bit of nutrients.
I guess I forgot to point out one of the interesting... For three-toed sloths, they leave the tree to poop. It's one of the only times they come down out of the tree.
Oh, that's
So like even if
nice.
a mom like drops her baby, she won't necessarily go get the baby, but like she'll still leave the tree to go poop once a week. So
wow,
and we don't know entirely why, because it's a huge energy expenditure to climb all the way down, then climb all the way back up, and they're at their most vulnerable because they still at the base of the tree, so they're still just like hugging the tree with their back turned to the rest of the forest for any like passing cat or feral dog to just go at them. But that's the time they dig a little hole with their tail. They have like a little stubby tail, and then they poop, and they pee on the poop. While they're pooping, all of the moths that live in their fur leave the fur, go down onto the poop, lay their eggs, and then go back into the fur. And then by the time the sloth's done, all the moths have retreated back into the fur, and the sloth climbs back up in the tree, and then the moth larvae hatch, eat the poop as their nutrient source, pupate into adult moths, fly up into the canopy, and find a new sloth to colonize. So it's something about the pooping might have to do with the life cycle of this moth, but it's not clear what the sloth gets out of that, so why would it put itself at such high risk? So
yeah, well, I mean, we're all kind of being controlled by all sorts of...
I know, yeah, it's like on a certain level, the little I guess it's not microscopic when they're moths on your fur, but, that idea that, like, more of our cells are not us than us.
Yeah.
Because most of us as bacteria, we're just like a sack that bacteria has figured out to get to walk around for it.
Yeah. My friend Mike Kaplan, who was on my stand-up science show last night, has a joke about how more of our cells are bacteria than human cells. And so it's like we're bacteria by popular vote by our electoral colleges.
It's a good joke for DC.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. And
so sorry, I didn't mean to derail us. But
I'm so fascinated right now. I feel like we're on my podcast right now. Yeah, that's endlessly... these are the things that fascinate me to no end.
Yeah.
And
you and Darwin, you're in good company, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a long history of just looking at animals and going, man, that's weird.
Why?
I gotta figure this out. Yeah.
Well, I get the pooping thing. Huh. I did not think when you were like biologists talk a lot about poop, I was like,
What's
well,
interesting
there's
about
nothing
that? Yeah.
very interesting about poop. Why? And now I cannot stop thinking about sloth poop. So
and then on the
this is
paleo
amazing.
side, we've got like caves out in the American Southwest where the entire floor of the cave is just ground sloth poop that's 10 to 30,000 years old.
The whole floor of the cave.
At multiple layers, like there's strata. You can see like...
So they were cave-dwelling sloth?
Yeah, it's a species called Nothrotheriops shastensis, or the Shasta ground sloth. And sloths today are very bad at thermoregulating. So it's one of the reasons they're restricted to the tropics, is they can't really maintain a high body temperature like most mammals. They are almost at ambient temperature, and their temperature fluctuates with the temperature throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that was also a condition for ground sloths, which is up for some debate, then they were maybe going into caves as a thermal refuge, because caves tend to approximate whatever the average temperature is. So if it's cooler outside, it's likely to be a little warmer in the cave. So maybe they were going there to hang out or den or have their kids, babies.
See,
There's no word for a baby sloth, so I don't know exactly how to refer to them. But
really?
yeah, there's no like cub or kit or anything like that.
Oh, wow.
We've talked about it a lot, but we haven't come up with anything yet. So if you have any ideas for, I've put forward slothlet, but that hasn't caught on.
I like slothlet.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the pooping thing, it sounds like just a spandrel-like behavior or something. It sounds like just a holdover from something else, right?
There's been talk about that too, is that maybe it's there's some like the way that geese will roll their eggs back into their nest if the egg falls out. Like maybe it's just some wiring in the sloth brain that says like, whenever I gotta poop, I gotta go out of the tree, and there's no actual reason for it.
But there may have been at one point
yeah, exactly.
to get it away from you.
It could be scent camouflage, right? If they poop up in the trees, that might give away their position to predators.
But it's so crazy because wouldn't your poop just fall to the ground?
You would think so.
Where you're climbing all the way down to put it anyway.
Most predators are like attuned to movement. You know that I mean, it's a myth about the T-Rex only seeing movement.
So
but
you see where the poop is falling from, and then
I've spent a lot of time.
But then you're climbing all the way down. The predator's going to see you anyway. This is very perplexing.
It is very perplexing.
Wow.
It's very unclear why they do this, and you can't exactly
if we figure
ask
out
them.
sloth poop, we might just unlock the secrets of the universe.
Yep.
Huh. Yeah, I mean that is the great and interesting thing about science, is just asking bizarre questions about who knows what has led to an incredible number of insanely important discoveries.
The problem is sometimes you ask a question, but there's as yet no method to test it. And that's where I get frustrated, is when you reach that limit of like what's knowable given our current technology or given or even our current ethics. Like there are things that we could test, but ethically we choose not to. And so that's where I get fascinated, is like the bleeding edge of what's possible.
Ethically, or just what's possible?
The ethically one, I don't have a lot of desire to like push the boundaries of ethics, but like technology wise, we were talking about time travel before. You know, I know physicists would be very excited if they figured out time travel, but paleontologists are going to be in line to use that machine pretty quickly if we can go backwards in time. I know going forwards in time is a different prospect entirely, but like as a paleontologist, to be able to go back and just observe these animals that we can only observe through what data is locked in the fossils that are left over would just be such a huge opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, that's the stories that you inevitably have to create in trying to make sense of why bones are arranged in a certain way.
That is one of the things I like about paleontology, is that it's, all science to a certain extent is storytelling, but like paleo, you really get to kind of weave a narrative sometimes without hopefully, overstepping what you can actually say definitively. But there's a storytelling element to it.
I know. I love a good evolutionary story. We're recording this the day after Valentine's Day, and one of my favorite stories that I've made up, that is probably completely untrue, but it's a story that I've made up that sounds good to me, is the reason why giving flowers is this tradition, as it goes back to hunter-gatherers, where hunters weren't just going out to hunt. I believe they were also out discovering new areas and keeping an eye out for new territories to also gather resources from. And one of the best indicators of future resources is flowers are a very clear sign that there's going to be future fruit there. and potentially other wildlife there. And so if you're out and about and you see this sign, even before verbal communication, you could grab these flowers, go back, bring it to show people, especially if ladies are impressed by your ability to get research. If they're impressed by your ability to hunt, they're sure also impressed by your ability to find new areas that are, which gathering was a better source of resources and nutrients than hunting ever was anyway. And so you arrive with these flowers, and it's this indicator like, hey, I know where we can go next. And the other kind of more shady aspect of it is that because if you're pulling the flowers out, you don't necessarily need to tell the person where you got these flowers. So it's a bit of a bargaining chip as well, where you have this honest sign of, I have found this a rich source of future resources, and I have the information of where that is.
Whereas bees just trust each other and do a little dance, and then because what you've described is bees. Like bees fly out and find a patch of flowers, and then come back to the hive and do a little dance that tells everyone where the flowers are, and then they all go out and have the flowers together. But humans that just aren't as trusting or aren't as communally focused, I guess.
And maybe they were, but it would be an option.
Yeah. I love the idea of like a black comedy where a guy, like the dweeb of the tribe, is coming home with all these flowers, and the jock sees him and is like, oh, well, I'm going to take those flowers, and like hits him with a rock and kills him. And he's got all these flowers, but he doesn't actually know where they came from. So then becomes the comedy of errors of him like trying to bluff his way through his productivity patch. All right, so that was part one of my interview with Shane, but, now is a good time. Most comedy clubs have a 2-drink minimum, and so we're going to have one of those drinks in our next segment, which is, what are we drinking? It wouldn't be an episode of Science Sort of if we didn't also talk about what we are drinking. I don't mean to disparage any of the comedy clubs I've been to, but the drinks are usually not very good, so you guys are hopefully bringing something better to the table. Charlie, why don't you start us off?
It's noon where I am in West Coast, Cascadia, and so I am drinking a refreshing beverage from my Starbucks that's 3 stories below me. And today I went with a strawberry acai refresher.
I've always heard it acai.
Acai refresher. It is made by Starbucks Corporation. It contains strawberries, acai, and passion fruit, and caffeine from cold brew green coffee. It's quite delicious, and if Starbucks would like to sponsor our show, they'd be welcome to.
Really wish you'd brought this up in the business meeting portion of the recording, but yeah, sure. Starbucks, throw us some cash. If that drink is sold in bottled form on Amazon, maybe folks can go get it there through our affiliate link. That would be great for us. Patrick, are you gonna what corporate entity are you representing?
Right. I have a McFlurry. That's not true, but you can get a Cadbury egg McFlurry in the UK around Easter time. That's cool.
And you emphasize by slamming whatever it is you're drinking onto the table with your mic.
Yeah, I'm continuing my tour through whiskeys spelled without an E. This is a Glenlivet single malt called Founder's Reserve, and I don't know what else to say about it until I taste it. Let's see. It's definitely on the Scotchy. We've had this conversation about I envision a triangle when I'm drinking these whiskeys. There's like the American bourbon sort of style whiskey that's usually pretty smooth. There's Scotch, which is kind of, I don't have the vocabulary down. I'm going to call it rough. And then there's like peat, which is on its own corner of the triangle. So this is not a peaty Scotch, but it's definitely up there in the rough corner of the triangle.
Puts up a fight?
Yeah.
What's the proof?
What is the proof? I think it's 40 proof. Let me see.
Well, 80 proof would be
80 proof.
40
It's a nice
proof would be
Scotch port.
You have just a glass of Drambuie.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it easily accessible on the label.
Okay, I've lost interest. I am having. I've had to, start thinking of ways to mix up this segment for myself, just because I think for a lot of the early part of the show, I would just have a different brewery, or whatever. But then you live in a place long enough, you start to run low on the brewery. So then I was, having whiskey and cocktails, and it's just it can be tough to keep coming up with new things to try, so that I'm not repetitive. And this time,
smoking opium?
Looks like I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue. My dad and I were just talking about that movie the other day. I picked up a Bittermilk No. 1 non-alcoholic handcrafted cocktail mixer to make a bourbon barrel aged old fashioned. Makes one cocktail. So it's this tiny little half-ounce bottle. It's as cute as can be. And it has some sugar, some orange peels, some spices, and the bitters. And so you basically are just supposed to pour this into your shot of bourbon or rye whiskey, garnish with an orange peel. I also threw in a little Luxardo cherry, feeling fancy, and I cannot get the top of this off, so I can't tell anyone how it tastes.
Wait, this is like a Betty Crocker instant cake, but instead of adding an egg, you add a shot of whiskey?
Yep. Except I legitimately cannot get the top off, guys. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have one of the... What is it?
I did find it is 40% alcohol.
Okay.
You can't get the top off the...
It's got a little screw top on the Bittermilk thing, and it is stuck on there.
Can you get the top off the whiskey bottle?
Well, the whiskey shot is already poured, and the whiskey
that's more important.
For you?
The Bone Snapper Rye. Ooh, it's very syrupy. It's more syrupy than I expected, everybody. So I basically bought this just because I was like, oh, I can have a whiskey I've already had on the show, which the Bone Snapper Rye qualifies as, and do something different with it. I might need to start a little more, but so far so good. It definitely sweetens the drink up considerably. I don't know if I give this a super strong recommendation. I feel like maybe I would probably add more bitters to this. Like I would
add more bourbon to it.
Well, I tend to not like a very sweet drink. I'm more of a spirit forward guy. So maybe I would maybe use this as a simple syrup, and I might not even use the whole bottle in a single shot of drink. Maybe I could see this being made into 2 cocktails. It is definitely not bad. As a syrup, it is actually quite nice. I just don't know that it gives me all the bitterness that I want for my old fashioned.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just tried a little bit of it on its own without the whiskey in it, and it tastes like a cinnamon orange simple syrup, which is not a bad thing, but not exactly what I thought it was going to be.
Christmassy.
Yeah.
What's the sugar source? The sweetener source?
It's a good question. Thank you for asking. A Florida golden cane sugar and molasses.
Okay, that's legit. At least those are things that present in the old-fashioned era.
Yeah. I know Bittermilk makes a number of other cocktail products, and I don't have a ton of experience with the brand, but I am enjoying this one right now. And what else I enjoyed was continuing my discussion with Shane, which we're going to go back to right now.
I'm surprised there hasn't been any TV shows about our evolutionary history. I think maybe they tried. There's like a day one or something like that.
It's hard because it's so fraught. I don't know if you deal with this when you talk to people, because you're traveling around the country and the world, but mostly the country.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of places where maybe the ideas of evolutionary biology still haven't taken root.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you get pushback on that? Because I feel like in a lot of ways I feel like a lot of ways people get uncomfortable with evolutionary biology specifically because it says where we came from.
Yeah.
If it explained the rest of nature, I don't know that people would be as bothered.
I think there's misconceptions. They think that it is, if we're saying that we evolved certain traits.
The evolutionary psychology side of things.
Yeah. Say we evolved aggression because of this in our past, or we evolved, say, cheating or certain
Well,
gender
there's like
norms or
an
something
idea
like that.
male humans evolved like a bigger jaw and a heavier brow to literally take punches from other males, which is kind of like a weird self-reinforcing, like, so are we supposed to be punching each other in the face? Because that doesn't seem like a healthy way to move ahead here.
Yeah, and so I think that there is, when people hear this stuff, they're like, so are you saying that's okay?
Mm-hmm.
That like that is, and people often would misuse information like, well, chimps are aggressive to other chimps, therefore it's okay for us to go to war.
Right.
And that's not at all what science is saying in any way.
When I talk about this with other scientists, we often make the distinction that science describes what is, not what ought to be.
Yes, exactly. But I think that is a really big hang up for a lot of people, that they think you're saying it's what ought to be.
And is that the main kind of pushback you get from when you're out in places?
That, and then also, it's a lot of any kind of genetic and even environmental determinism. People just don't like the idea of determinism. I think our consciousness has evolved to provide this story that we have a fair amount more free will and control over our circumstances than we actually do. And I think we seek out, unpredictability and lack of control are these two major stressors in human life. And I think we seek out any semblance of control and predictability that we can. We have this overactive pattern recognition software, and what is it, hypothenia, where people just overperceive patterns in the environment.
And then pareidolia, which is like seeing faces everywhere, which we're really good at.
Yeah. And so I think that also rattles people a little bit too, to say that, especially, I mean, it depends. Basically, progressives don't want to hear any talk about biological gender differences, for example, and then the conservatives don't want to hear much of the rest of it, essentially. And but I found this early on that going and talking about so evolution conflicts with these religious beliefs and traditions, so you get pushback there. So I would make a lot of, early on, I put a special on Netflix called Mating Season, and that was me trying to figure out a way of, it's my least favorite body of work that I've ever done. It was kind of my first take at kind of doing a themed thing, and where I failed was I underestimated the intelligence of audiences, and I made it too accessible. I dumbed things down too much, and I really could have pushed the ideas further. But the reason why I did that was because I really wanted to make it very accessible, because I was doing a lot of gigs in like the South and whatnot, and I liked the idea of standing in front of an audience of very religious people and talking about evolution in a way, I would often say like adaptation or that sort of thing, in a way that they would understand. And an easy way to do that is to be like, hey, so, men and women have these peculiarities, right? And then people be like, yes, that is true. And then you'd be like, well, here, there's these animals that also kind of behave in the same way. And I'm like, oh, that's so funny. And then you go, and then there's some biological reasons why that's the case. They're like, oh, that's interesting. And then you go, because we adapted. They're like, wait a second. I think we're about to talk about evolution. But it was this way that I could kind of slip evolution talk into the conversation with a bunch of creationists in a way that they could understand. But what I didn't predict was the other side of it, is that any gender, then when progressives hear about gender difference stuff, that's exactly the pushback that you get, that you think you're saying that this is the way that it ought to be,
right, yeah.
Because if you're saying there's this minimal parental investment theory, and that women do the selecting, and guys are meant to compete and advertise or whatever, and everything that comes along with that you're saying it's okay. That, say, because guys have this cognitive bias that makes us overperceive women's sexual interest, that I'd be saying like it's okay for guys to like go up and be creeps or something like that. And that's not at all what I'd be saying. I think I'm saying that the findings are explaining some of what's going on, and if we want to work
overcome
toward
it, yeah,
we should be. It really helps if we can be aware of where some of these drives came from in the first place. Because at the end of the day, the more aware, this is really just mindfulness being extended, and everyone's all about mindfulness these days, right? So the more we're aware of these drives that we, until science, weren't consciously aware of, then we can really we have a lot more freedom in our choices if we know what is driving us, is my way of thinking about it.
You know, I'm consistently fascinated and flummoxed by people for whom more information is not considered an asset. Like I never I mean, maybe I'm probably an information junkie to the point where it's like a problem that I want too much information, but the other side of the coin makes even less sense to me. So
yeah, and it seems like it comes from all aspects of humanity, and I don't know.
I've heard you use a phrase that I use a lot too, where you talk about like something deep in our monkey brain, and I know that that's like probably not the most accurate way to refer to things, but I like thinking of like our more primal or basal or whatever parts of why we do what we do as sort of like the little monkey brain talking to you. Like there's all these theories about like fear of snakes and things like that come from some deep part of our brain that's not really consciously accessible. And like whether it's true or not, maybe we'll figure that out someday, but it makes for a compelling narrative, I think, at least.
Yeah, it certainly does, and I think it can help for people that are overly scared of, say, spiders, when the spiders aren't actually... That's a perfect example of, like, okay, well, you're not actually in an environment. Most of us aren't in an environment where there are poisonous spiders around, so there is nothing to be concerned about, so you shouldn't let that spider freak you out. And in that same way, I think that many of our drives that had a place and propagated genes for whatever reason. That's the other thing, is people seem to think that evolution is making things better.
It's directional.
It's directional. And we're like,
or aspirational,
heading toward this perfection. Then that's the other, like that things that happened along the way were the right things to happen along the way, and that's another big misunderstanding that I wish more people were aware of.
Yeah, one of our previous guests, a friend of mine, Nick Pyenson, who just wrote a book on whale evolution, basically says like we have a very good.
Does he live in DC?
Yeah.
I think I have that book.
It's a good book.
My girlfriend's reading it at the moment.
And he talks about how like we have a very good fossil record of whale evolution. And it makes it seem deterministic. It makes it seem like you start with this kind of hooved carnivorous animal that gets a little more aquatic, the legs start getting reduced. And it seems very linear and sequential, but that's because we're only viewing the path that ended up in the final result. We're not seeing all the offshoots that failed and didn't go quite right. And like it presents it as if it was a narrative when really it's a crapshoot that ends in a particular species surviving into the observable world. So
right.
Yeah.
One thing that I do think about is how just our belief systems, like what can evolve in the first place. Say you become really aware of this stuff, and then you go, well, you know what? Maybe I don't need to just blindly propagate my genes, and I can, if I do want kids, I can have like fewer of them because there's a big cost involved, and I can take more care of the kids
worldwide
that
trend
I have.
in a lot of places.
And it is, but then how that belief system, it's going to be hard for it to evolve or take off because I don't want kids.
You're reducing your genetic contribution.
But I'm not passing on the whatever genes and environmental influences that made me not want kids isn't going to move forward into the future.
Sounds like you're pitching a very highbrow sequel to Idiocracy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit before I have to go is you started bringing scientists up onto the comedy stage.
Yeah, so I started the Here We Are podcast about 5 years ago or something like that. We just had episode 200, and that was because I got into evolutionary biology and psychology a lot, and started reaching out to academics and wanted to put together something. I didn't know what, and had the most fascinating conversations of my life with all of these academics. And so I just decided I'd start this podcast. And then the podcast has been a ton of fun for me. Also, as I've learned a lot, I've also felt more like I don't fit into the traditional comedy club setting as much as I used to. I used to be big into drinking and partying, and my jokes were, it was always kind of cerebral, but my jokes more reflected that. And the older I get, the more my jokes are about kind of our search for purpose in life and where that comes from and our instincts. And I like making jokes about animal behavior and that sort of stuff. That is harder and harder to do in these environments that's predominantly filled with like a lot of, not predominantly, but there's a lot of like drunken bachelor and bachelorette parties that make it hard to keep people's attention. And so last year I was thinking like, I'm always like, well, what do I want to be doing? If money was no object and I just got to do whatever I felt like doing, I was like, well, I think what annoys me now is that I can't present really big ideas because I'm beholden to having to have a laugh every 10 seconds or have like a really exciting fact or whatever.
So the format of stand-up wasn't really lending itself to what you wanted to be doing.
Yeah, and I was like, I just want to be able to present my bigger ideas in a way and still have some fun and tell some jokes along the way. But I don't even want to present it as necessarily a comedy show. I would just want to kind of stand up there and talk about science. And I was like, oh, stand-up science. That's kind of what I want to do. And then I constructed this idea for this show, Stand-Up Science, that's me and another comic, each show joined by two scientists. So it's a comedy set, then a scientist giving a talk, then a comedian, then a scientist giving a talk. And allows me to riff on some of my ideas and riff on some of their research that they're presenting. And then it's a Q&A at the end, a panel where all four of us get on stage, and I kind of moderate this panel that's led mostly by questions from the audience. And I started doing that last fall, and it was really fun, and people came out for it. And so I launched a big tour of it this year, and it's been going really well so far. And so I'll be doing this show for the foreseeable future. I'm kind of seeing what cities it works the best at, and then I'm going to keep on going back to those cities. And it's a different show each time because it's different guests each time, and mixing it up and doing this for the foreseeable future.
How do you find the scientists in each city that you want to bring on the show?
Well, it's helpful that I've been doing the podcast for a while now, so I reach out to past guests and ask them and tell them what cities I'm going to.
Do you have to coach them at all for like, here's how you get up on a stand-up stage and talk into a microphone, or do they?
I just prepare the audience for what's happening. I just ask them to give a talk about their research, and then I tell the audience.
And they don't get to use slides or anything, right?
They can use slides.
Oh, you can have like PowerPoint slides and stuff? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of acacademics would feel naked.
I would feel incredibly naked without my deck or my slides.
So we have that. We have those capabilities everywhere. I have a projector that I bring along with me everywhere if the venue doesn't have one. And so I just think I try to do a better and better job of prepping the audience and the advertising of the show, making sure that everyone knows that this is half comedy, half science. Mm-hmm. So the science talks, the scientists are going to be talking about science, comedians are going to be doing comedy, and there's not as much overlap within those. It's just either one or the other. And then at the end, it's a combination of everything. The panel is a funny science conversation.
So how do your comedian colleagues who do the show, what is that kind of their reaction?
Mixed. I mean, everyone it's been fun because I've got to get the best comics in each city. I kind of seek out the nerdiest comics in a given city, and they've all done really good in their sets. Have been, I asked them to do their most cerebral material. And so it's just a really fun environment that the audience is expecting that. And so comedians can kind of do their most kind of elevated material. And The panel is less predictable. That's what I'm having to learn how to be better at moderating that. Sometimes the comics have been like rather quiet, and then other times they're really involved and cracking jokes and stuff. And so, I'm making a choice between whether I reach out to comics I don't know or whether I should bring comedian friends along with me because they're more comfortable in the Q&A portion of the show. But so far, there's still a lot of trial and error involved in this show, so I'm still figuring it out.
Do the scientists get laughs usually?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the subject matter, not all of them. Some of them are a little more technical.
What if I get my sloth poop lecture? You think I could
yeah,
get a few chuckles?
Yeah, last night we were talking about sperm competition, and sperm competition is really fun and interesting. So I thought that, it went well, got some laughs, and was very interesting at the same time for a lot of people. And so, yeah, every individual is different. One person that comes to mind had a talk about this rare disease that causes a lot of infant mortality, and it's a really dark, pretty serious subject matter. But he was a really funny guy and presents his work in a really entertaining way. And then I've had people that I thought the subject matter was inherently funny and interesting, and they were a lot more serious than I would have expected them to be. But again, I prep the audience. I tell them that it's going to be a science talk, and so not to expect comedy, but sometimes they're funny.
That's cool. I will link to the show notes on the page to your website that lists your tour dates for this particular comedy show or science comedy show, but you're also on the road doing just stand-up too, right? And is your stand-up, I guess we've talked a little bit about how your stand-up is also heavily science influenced, and you're a very busy guy because you have your podcast, which we've already mentioned, but you also have a movie coming out, right?
Yeah, I have a documentary called Pyschonautics, a comics exploration of psychedelics. It comes out on March 5th on Amazon and iTunes. And it's, I did a tour about psychedelics. I had a one-man show about psychedelics and kind of their positive influence on me and the kind of state of psychedelic research today. And it was really successful, and these people making a documentary wanted to kind of explore that further, and so we did. And spoiler alert, I ended up losing my mind during the documentary, so that was interesting.
With the cameras rolling? Or
no, off. It's a very long story.
Okay.
And people
so go see
will have
the movie.
go see the movie. I came back from it and everything.
Good.
And so
Glad.
yeah. So as far as I know, I'm back in reality, and this is reality, right? We're in.
It's DC.
Yeah, it's DC.
It's a type of reality. It's a very skewed lens, but you know it's.
So I recommend people checking that out, checking out my podcast. Here we are, and hopefully get to see me live.
Absolutely. And last question. You mentioned you pick these scientists that you think are going to be interesting or put on a good show on stage, but in general, is there lessons that scientists can or should learn from stand-up comedy when we're thinking about doing our outreach and how we get more people in a country that in some ways is seemingly ever increasingly anti-science or antagonistic or aggressive towards the work we're doing? Is there lessons that we could learn from your craft to be better at this?
Oh boy, that's a really good question. I'm not very prepared for it. I would say that one of the things that comedians do is, I think good comedians push themselves to get out of their comfort zone and to kind of get comfortable bombing and putting themselves in different situations. And I would definitely say that, it's easy for any of us to just stay in our comfort zone, and academics have their little bubbles that they're in. And so anything that they can do, like if, say, they get an email from a comedian asking them to be on a show called Stand Up Science, and it's a different and interesting opportunity to jump at it, or if say a comedian reaches out to them to be on a podcast called Here We Are, I would say yes to that.
Honestly, I've said similar things when I give podcasting seminars to scientists because I've been doing this for a while. Scientists and other people who are just generally interested in doing a podcast. And one of the things I talk about is like, here's how you be a good podcast guest if you don't ever intend on starting your own podcast. And like also, yeah, say yes to people who want to promote your work. I get really frustrated because I don't know if you've experienced this where I'll get a scientist that I'm interested in and they'll be like, oh, what I work on is not interesting.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
So I tell them, I was like, now if I reached out to you and said, I was going to ask you to be on my podcast, but I don't think what you do is very interesting, you'd be really offended because I just insulted your life's work. So maybe don't like do that to yourself and give yourself credit for the work you do and talk to me about it. So
yeah, there's a lot of imposter syndrome and stuff that runs
it's real
through
bad.
academia.
Myself included. Like
yeah, me too.
Yeah, definitely in it.
I mean, who am I to be talking about imposter syndrome? But
Well, just fake imposter syndrome until you make it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that I mean, as a child, we need to be taught to treat others the way that we want to be treated. But as an adult, I think we often need to remind ourselves to treat ourselves the way we treat others. I think that we often wouldn't call other people's work boring and not interesting. So why say that about your own work? But that's life. I think that I will say this. So far, two of the people that like said no originally to stand-up science and then changed their mind, or like the other academic on the show or whatever talked them into doing it, they've been two of the best guests. So the people that were like, I'm not going to be good at this, have been the best.
Awesome.
So there's some sort of like a Dunning-Kruger sort of thing going on there. So maybe if you think your stuff isn't interesting at all, it's the most interesting stuff. In my experience, that's sometimes been the case.
Just get on stage and start talking.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. ShaneMauss.com is your website.
Yeah,
and,
MAUSS.
And Twitter. You're on Twitter as well.
At Shane Comedy. Yeah. I'm not as big of a fan of social media, but I've been starting to tweet again a little bit.
But the website has all your tour dates and all the info about the upcoming film and everything. Yep. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today.
Thank you.
So that was the rest of my interview with comedian Shane Mauss. Go check him out if he's on tour near you. I guess something I didn't talk about in the interview, but Julie and I actually did go see him perform stand-up later that day after I finished chatting with him. Well, actually, what happened right after I finished the interview is he was like, hey, do you want to go ahead?
Had to go potty.
I didn't have to go potty, but I did end up recording an episode of his podcast with him because he got interested, especially when I started talking about some of the sloth stuff because I can't help myself. And he was like, that's really interesting. Do you have time? Do you want to just go ahead and switch out the recording equipment and do an episode of his podcast? Here we are. And I said, sure, that sounds great. And so I just put away my recorder and my two mics, and he pulled out his recorder and his two mics. And then we just, in the same seats we were in, went ahead and did an episode of his show. And that came out a few weeks ago. And it is episode 213 of the Here We Are podcast called Sloths Fossils, featuring yours truly, Ryan Hep.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Was it funny?
I don't know that I was particularly funny in the interview. I was mostly, it's that thing where it's like I know enough about sloths and they're so generally misunderstood that I tend to like tumble over myself to get it all out. So I feel like I just fast talked my way for an hour through trying to explain how weird sloths are. So I don't know. I would love feedback on it if people want to go give it a listen. I was honored to be asked. I hope I represented myself and my science well. Who knows?
Sweet.
And then we went, so Julie and I went and saw his comedy later that night, and he was very funny. So have you guys been to a lot of comedy shows?
Can't say that I've been to a lot. I have been to comedy shows.
So the structure is usually they'll have an MC who I think either works for or is a volunteer at the club, and they kind of run the show and bring people up and off the stage. And the woman doing it that night was very funny, and apparently she works for NASA, so she also had kind of a cool science and comedy thing going. And then there was an opener who was also a scientist who does comedy on the side. I don't remember her name right now, but I think she's the opener for Shane on his tour, so if you can find his tour, you can probably find her information. And she was good. And then they have a middle act, which is usually somebody local to the club. And that guy was definitely my least favorite of anyone that night. Not for anything he did wrong, even though he told a couple of Washington football team jokes, which I'm not a huge fan of sports ball, especially my home NFL team, nor the NFL in general. But that's neither here nor there for this show.
NFL, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, you're welcome. Well,
I do always wear a helmet when I'm podcasting, just to be safe. And then, Shane got up and did about an hour, and it was really funny, and saw him afterwards, and he was handing out stickers to the podcast. So hopefully maybe some of the people in that audience with me that night took a sticker to the podcast, listened to my episode, and are here now listening to this episode. And so if there's anyone who had that circuitous path to listening to the show, please let us know, because that would be really interesting to find out. And if you do let us know, you will be featured in the final segment of the show, and that is the PaleoPOW. Coming at you, boy. PaleoPOWs, the final segment of the show where we feature feedback from our lovely listeners. We do have a patron this episode, but the way we normally do it is on episodes where my co-hosts haven't necessarily heard all the content of the show itself. We put that at the end, so we maybe have a little bit more to talk about. So I am actually going to go first, and I have an email from Jon O, and I picked this email. It's referring to a previous episode of the show, but it sort of applies to some of the stuff I talked about with Shane. In particular, traveling the country especially to some of the rural parts of the country as a comedian who talks very openly about evolution. So Jonathan wrote in to say thanks. He says, "Hey Ryan, I just wanted to say that I appreciated you clarifying about young Earth creationists in this last episode." And when last episode, they mean the last episode they listened to, not the episode you're listening to now. "Most younger Christians like me are adapting our views of the Bible to incorporate whatever we learn from science. We definitely don't want to be looped in with the Christians who believe that science and Christianity are at odds and that they have to deny or disprove evolutionary science to preserve their belief." And then John has an opinion about the politics of putting religious beliefs into science curricula that is something I agree with, but maybe not something we're gonna push super hard here in this segment. And then John thanks us for the weekly science fix that we provide. And I wanted to read this because it's nice to get feedback saying that you're doing right by a group of people. And it also, I just couldn't 100% remember if we were careful enough with that distinction in my interview with Shane. So I just wanted to read that again here to show that we do know all the distinctions that are worth distinguishing and try our best, even if we slip up sometimes. So, consider that if you're already angrily typing your email about something I said in the interview. Thanks. Patrick, what are you bringing to the table today?
I got an email from Graeme N.
Is that some sort of irate Australian living in Oklahoma?
He's living in Oklahoma.
Yes, well, Graeme has written in before and has signed off as being an irate Australian.
Irate Australian. Okay, yeah, he references his irateness in this message. He says, "Well, the subject of this message is 250th show."
Sometimes I have to pull from the archives, you guys.
I'm assuming he would say this in an Australian accent, but I will not attempt one.
Go ahead. We'll wait. I mean, because he spelled some words with the Australian spelling, so I think if you don't do it in the Australian accent, it's not going to work.
The Australian spelling. Skepticism, I guess.
Either that or he's just a bad speller, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt that that's the Australian way to spell that word.
All right. He says, "Hey, I enjoyed your 250th show, especially your discussion on my question on the naked ape hypothesis. Even though I had completely forgotten, I had written this email."
Bet he forgot he wrote this one too. We're keeping that consistent.
Ryan really seemed to break it down in his usual verbose way. And I don't know, winky smiley emoji. "Patrick, you are definitely welcome to drop by me in Tulsa and have a beer. By the way, I'm not really irate. This applies to everyone on the show too. Would love to meet to discuss science, skepticism, and beer. Keep up the good work. Looking forward to the next 250 episodes." Right on.
We're part of the way to the next 250.
Yeah, we're well on our way.
As of this recording. So, yeah, Tulsa folks, I guess just amongst our co-hosts. So, Kelly, Joe, Abe, Ben, when you're listening to this episode, know that if you go to Tulsa, Graeme will hit you up with a beer.
Maybe. I mean, he implies that he would drink a beer with us.
Gotcha. So we might have to buy the beer ourselves, you think?
It's unclear. I'm just saying, don't get your
I'll just have a water. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay, Charlie, why don't you read the email that our lovely patron Matt R sent in, and then we will decide what to do from there, because it presents something of a philosophical conundrum.
All right. Dear PaleoPOWs, I would like to start off by saying thank you for all the effort that has gone into making the show. I cannot imagine the time needed to set aside to put this production together over the years. I started listening to the show August 6, 2017, year of our Lord.
Precise. I love it.
With episode 1, and have just caught up with episode 297, Unintentional Turtle Soup. That averages to little more than an episode every other day, 0.6 episodes per day to be exact. Wow, that's like 10% of his time dedicated to science, sort of.
We're in his head.
5%.
Do you think he dreams in the format of the podcast? Like, because I don't know about you guys, every once in a while,
Wakes
like
up in the middle of the night to pee and get a drink.
Cold sweat.
Well, it's like if I get like really into a video game, like if I go on a Skyrim kick where I'm playing Skyrim, in a lot of my free time for a couple of days, I'll dream in Skyrim.
Mm-hmm.
Does that happen? Not happen to you guys?
Yeah.
I rarely remember what I dream.
Okay.
I'm usually so sleep deprived and abusing myself that I don't dream too much anymore.
All right. Well, that was a more depressing answer than I was looking for. So let's just move on with Matt's email.
No, my dreams have gotten super surreal. Let's talk about dreams. That's all. People are always super into when people talk about their dreams.
Yeah.
There's no more interesting conversation than when someone it starts off with like, this reminds me of a dream I had. Anyways, continuing on, that averaged to little more than an episode every other day, 0.6 per day to be exact. And coincidentally, I found myself in a position to help support the show. It has been interesting to listen to you grow in so many ways over the years. That makes more sense if you know that I'm 47 years old. Thank you again, Matt R. P.S. A bachelor's of science sort of is not necessary. I'll just be happy to be a part of the Google Hangout to ask questions. If I could ask a question in replacement of a BSso from Charlie, I was wondering what his take on liquid salt reactors was. I find it fascinating aspect of energy production, but in my limited knowledge and research online, I cannot piece together all the positives and negatives. Thanks. All right. Do we want to address liquid salt reactors first?
We got a couple of things to address. One of the things we have to address is the whole Google Hangout thing, because we have been very remiss in fulfilling that obligation of our patrons. And a lot of it is just schedules get crazy, and then it's like you don't actually put it on the schedule, and then you forget about it, and then I ended up having a lot of guilt around not doing it, and so then like the hurdle of doing the first one got built up in my head. So here's what we're gonna do. This Sunday, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern time, we are going to do our first hangout. To keep it simple, for the first one, it's going to be me and Abe for sure. Obviously, any of my other co-hosts are welcome to join. They may drop in and out as they're available, or they may not be available at all. I know that's kind of late in the day for Patrick, but we were trying to accommodate West Coast schedules as well. And it's going to be 7 to 8 p.m. for an hour. We're going to hang out. Whoever of the patrons wants to come. Sunday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo.
I believe that'll be a Monday for you, Patrick.
just barely a Monday. And I'm going to tell you guys this. So, Charlie, if you're available, that would be awesome. Not a big deal if you're not. We're going to try to schedule these with more input from more of my co-hosts in the future. But for this first one, just to get it out of the way, I was like, Abe, I know your schedule, and you live nearby, so it's a little easier to coordinate things with you. And so I just got Abe on lock for this one. And that's going to be our first patron hangout. And then hopefully once we get in the rhythm, get in the groove, figure out the tech issues, we'll be able to do them monthly moving forward.
Is Google Hangout text, audio, or video based?
This will be a video hangout. Yeah. So
Cool.
I think the way it'll work is Abe and I will be on video. The patrons that come to hang out will not be on video, but they'll be able to chat with us, text in the chat text window. And I think there's an option to bring in, if only a couple of people show up and the technology works out this way, we can probably bring more people into the video stream who are patrons, not just co-hosts. So we're gonna see what happens.
Cool.
So Matt, I apologize to you directly and to all the patrons for not getting on top of this sooner, but your email broke the seal, and I'm going to make it happen for you.
All right.
I did come up with a plan for what we're going to talk about for that hour, even if no one shows up. Do you guys want to know? Because I haven't told Abe.
Dreams?
No, we're not. Yeah, we're just gonna talk about our dreams. No, I'm gonna make Abe design a D&D character. I've been itching for some fantasy role playing. I don't know that Abe's ever gonna play D&D, but I'm gonna make him make a character from scratch, which might even take more than an hour. But that's what we're gonna do. If other people show up and that is not interesting to them at all, we will abandon that immediately. But yeah, starting at 7, that's my plan. And Abe does not know that's going to happen. So it's just gonna be a lot of elves and dwarves and paladins and D20s, and it's gonna be great.
Cool.
Charlie, I think if you have an opinion on liquid salt reactors, let's touch on that. And then I think we have to figure out if we honor the request not to do a BSSO or if we just say, nope, you're a patron at that level and we do it.
So I don't have much of an opinion, I must confess, Matt. I'm not that well versed in most all of nuclear technologies just because they're expensive, and we have wind and solar now that are safer, less expensive, and much more readily deployable.
So I don't even know what a liquid salt reactor is.
Yeah, so the liquid salt reactors are fascinating nuclear reactor technology that the cooling fluid. So a nuclear reactor, you just make hot stuff by having radioactive uranium decay in a controlled reaction, producing neutrons that cause other uranium atoms to break apart, and it also releases heat. And so you want to release that heat in a controlled manner, and you take that heat and you boil water with it. Produce steam. That steam can drive a Rankine steam turbine and generate electricity. Typically, these are pretty low temperatures, and so based on the Carnot efficiency, you'll only get efficiencies of around 30%. A lot is just wasted as steam, and that's what you see those big cooling towers. They're just letting steam out. You don't want them too high temperature to achieve higher efficiencies because that increases corrosion, and with higher temperatures, you have higher pressures, and you don't want things to pop in a nuclear reactor. The cool thing about liquid salt reactors is the working fluid, rather than being water or another water-based substance, is that it's salt. And it's not table salt per se. It's more like fluorinated salts and beryllium and lithium and things like that. But these are at high temperatures, they can become a liquid, and they don't expand like water does with steam production, because you can maintain these super high temperatures in the liquid stage rather than the gas stage. So you can maintain low pressures but still achieve high temperatures. And so the uranium, the nuclear fuel, heats up the salt into a liquid form, and that's cycled through the reactor. Sometimes even the uranium is part of the coolant itself, the salt, and so it's just all flowing through it. And then that runs counterflow to a heat exchanger that has water in it. And then that liquid salt conductively heats up the water, making the steam that then runs the Rankine turbine. And so it's a way to achieve much higher temperatures, therefore higher efficiencies, higher energy densities, smaller reactors putting out an equivalent amount of power than traditional water reactors. So they're inherently safer because they can be more controlled, especially because the coolant is the reactor fuel itself. And so if there's a coolant leak, then you leak the fuel too, and it's no longer going to create that radioactive cascade. The other advantage is that you don't have water turning into steam in the presence of fissile material, and so you don't have hydrogen off-gassing. And as you know, hydrogen off-gassing is super flammable, highly reactive gas. Anytime you get oxygen near it, you can make explosions or rocket ships or things like that. I mean, the big problem with the Fukushima Daiichi disaster is they had runaway occurring, and then they had this rapid hydrogen gas production that was no longer being vented because of electrical failure. And so the hydrogen gas, being super light, pooled up in the ceiling of the reactor containment chamber, and then that exploded. Right, the hydrogen gas exploded, not anything nuclear or something. So you don't produce hydrogen, so it's safer that way too. And the energy density being much higher, there's even ideas of putting these things on airplanes, and you need very high energy density on an airplane because you don't want to spend all your thrust and lift carrying the fuel. You want to carry other things besides the fuel. I think the reason it didn't take off is just, main thing, fossil fuels are are safer, high energy density, easier to use for all sorts of things. And then wind and solar now are just much more attractive than nukes in general. So they may have had their chance in the 70s. People were too scared of the nukes. Could have gone well. France went with it with a lot of different technologies, and they have the lowest, carbon intensity of any OECD country. But we didn't, and I think they just...
What's OECD?
Organization of Economically Developed Countries. The C and D is flipped because it's in French, and they do weird things with their adjectives.
Okay, I didn't know what that referred to. I assumed it meant, developed countries, something like that. I just wanted clarification.
Yeah, so that's about all I know. And cool tech, just didn't really take off.
Patrick, I don't know that I've ever heard a better example of the whole scientist like, well, I don't really know a lot about this, proceeds to explain it backwards and forwards as far as I can tell.
Well, there's huge, molar ratios with the salts and how effectively they capture neutrons and blah, blah, blah. I don't know any of that stuff.
Salt's really cool. We should do an entire episode one of these days about just different things you can do with salt.
Salt.
So there's even molten salt solar power plants, right? These
is there?
solar power towers in Spain and Nevada. They're featured in the opening sequence of the new Blade Runner.
Oh.
And so you take a bunch of mirrors, angle them all into a glass point or a diamond point. And so you have super, super intense sunlight at this one point, and you use that to melt salt. You run that salt through a pipe to a heat exchanger, boil water, and you have power generation. And you have built-in energy storage in the molten salt, so that you can still generate electricity after the sun's gone down.
That sounds similar to the system that they use to grow crops in the Expanse series out on Ganymede, because the sun is much further away, so they have all these solar collectors and reflectors to amplify what little light is coming in to make it enough to grow crops.
But those power towers kind of missed their window too, because the price of multicrystalline photovoltaics is so much cheaper than that now. It's just, technology curves moved in different directions. And so some technologies, even though they can generate electricity, fall by the wayside because they become cost prohibitive.
Right.
So now the real question of the episode is, do we give Matt a thesis if he doesn't want one? Can we force a degree on someone, or do we just put a 404 file not found degree requirements incomplete, BSso not awarded?
We can give them an honorary BSSO, right? That's what they do to
but
fancy
it's not
people that
honorary
go to...
because in terms of as far as the actual degree requirements of a BSSO, it's just being a patron at the level that he is currently a patron at. So he's completed the degree requirements. He just hasn't. He apparently is refusing to submit the thesis.
He won't format his
Yeah. So
thesis correctly or something.
Exactly.
What's the joke? What's more prestigious than a degree from Harvard dropping out of Harvard? I guess he's a BSSO dropout.
Yes. Go start your own company. Go start your own podcast.
Right. And then advertise on this podcast, and we'll be like, these two college dropouts bought a sunglasses factory in Germany or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
I like that.
Yeah, I think it's our first SSO dropout.
Okay. So I literally wrote in square brackets for the thesis, because we have to put something up on the... Well, I guess we haven't started posting the thesis titles on the website on the patrons page. That's something we might do in the future. But I think I'm just going to do square brackets and say file not found, degree requirements incomplete, BSSO not awarded.
K grade.
Yeah, incomplete. I don't know. If you guys have a different idea, we can always change this retroactively too. Matt might come around and decide that, no, I do want a thesis. These are fun. And then we can award it.
Yeah, but the credit requirements might have changed by then.
Well, we're gonna make him pay more money.
Program.
God, what a shakedown, Charlie. Oh, yeah, nice thesis. Be ashamed if something happened to it.
Well, maybe if he can figure out what a molten salt reactor is.
Yeah. All right, so Matt, you were working on some sort of molten salt reactor thesis, but you didn't submit the paperwork, so we can't give you a BSSO, I guess. So if you change your mind, we will keep you tentatively enrolled for 1 credit hour just to keep you in the system, in the BSSO, our SSO university system.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he is paying filing fees.
That's true. They're paying tuition. That is an excellent point. So Matt, you're still enrolled, but let us know when you feel like defending and submitting. All right, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that result. I legitimately, I was really conflicted, and I think we worked it out nicely. Well, there's your show. You guys got anything to, got any plugs? I have a lot of plugs. I'm going to go last.
I mean, that's how this segment usually works. Is everyone else says, no, not really. And then you have like 3 or 4 things.
I know, but I can't be helped. Things have piled up. I'm behind on everything, yet somehow things keep coming out and I have to deal with it.
I guess I'll say something briefly about, so the Institute for Energy Studies here at Western Washington University has now launched a Bachelor of Sciences in Energy, in addition to their BA of Energy Policy. So if you want to get into the sciencey side of energy and you are interested in this pretty part of the country, then we have something to offer you.
Nice. Can you put a link to something about that in the Slack so I can include it in the show notes? I will include it in the show notes. Okay, so for me, I did the Here We Are podcast, which was a lot of fun. I also was recently on the podcast UnDisciplined, which is a science roundup where scientists are asked to talk about stories that are specifically not their discipline. So I talked about the study reviving the pig brains and the black hole image and a few other things. That is hosted by Matthew LaPlante out of Utah, and it actually is aired on Utah Public Radio. So that's kind of cool. So it's on the radio, you guys.
I still have those.
Apparently, you got to go sit in your car for a while, but that's how it does.
It's the only place anybody has one.
Powered by gasoline.
Yeah. You got to burn fossil fuels, but to listen to me. I also, folks might remember me plugging back during the AGU times, the Story Collider live show that I did, and a few of our listeners showed up to that, but that show is also now available online for your viewing. I think it's a video viewing pleasure. I have not watched it because that is more than I can handle right now. So if you are able to watch it and have feedback for me, let me know. But otherwise, that's just going to exist where it is. And then I was also on a podcast called the Retro Movie Roundtable, where some friends of mine from high school actually started a podcast where they watch retro movies, which by their definition is at least 10 years old. And I went on to do an episode with them talking about, you guys ready for this? The 1993 Disney's live action Three Musketeers, one of my favorite movies of all time.
That's a good one.
Yeah, for which Chris O'Donnell was nominated for a Razzie, which I don't think that's fair. I also was recently interviewed for AAAS, the Americans for the Advancement of Science website, because I haven't really talked about it on the show, but I've been volunteering in a local high school here in DC through a program where AAAS puts STEM professionals in local high schools. And for a long time, it's been sort of a thing that retired scientists do in their spare time, but increasingly there's been a push to get younger scientists to participate as well. And I am one of those participants, and I plan on doing something on the podcast about my experience working in this high school with this classroom of young people here in DC, because it was pretty amazing, and still continues to be amazing. I just haven't figured out how to format that yet, so I haven't done it yet, but they interviewed me about sort of me and one of the other younger volunteers and one of the older volunteers, sort of about our experience, why we felt compelled to do it, to volunteer our time. So you can go check that out. And I think that's it. There's more stuff coming, but I don't think anything else is out yet. But that was also a lot. So what more do you need?
Yeah, been busy.
Yeah, you're telling me. All right, well, thanks for joining me, guys. Next episode, since we're recorded well ahead, should I give a little preview? We don't normally do that, but I can.
It's a new take on the end of science, sort of. All right, lay it on us.
No, let's not do it. If people want it, come ask for it, or become a patron, because I give you the topics ahead of time. Haha, I tricked them. Patreon.com/science sort of. Amazon.com/science sort of. That doesn't work. That's not a link. We could not get Amazon to do that for us.
Microsoft.com/science sort of.
You can go to sciencesortof.com/Amazon, which will take you just to the Amazon homepage, but it'll work as a affiliate link. So anything you buy, if you go to sciencesortof.com/Amazon through Amazon, we get a little cut of. Take it out of Jeffy Bezos' pockets, give it to us.
That's right.
All right. Well, thanks again to Shane. Go check out the comedy. If we didn't make you laugh, he probably will, because he's a professional. And with that, we will see you next time for episode 308, where you are sure to get a whole lot more science.
Sort of.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolobe Media Network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
lab instead of laughing all the way to the bank. If you gotta laugh, I think we're going with it.
It's only when you explain it.
Yeah. I was laughing at it. It was like a Norm Macdonald anti-comedy joke.
Okay, so then we don't go with that one. What do you guys want?
If you'll explain.
All right, I'll explain it in the recording. Let's do it. I wanted this to be efficient use of our time, so.
All right.
No, I like it. It's fine. The whole explanation, I think, is worth it.